I am Julia Lewis, 38 years old, a sergeant first class in the United States Army Logistics Corps. I have spent my entire youth coordinating ammunition in the harshest combat zones, places where a single calculation error is paid for in blood. But no mortar shell has ever caused as much damage as the moment my husband, Kevin, leaned into my ear in the hallway of the federal courthouse and hissed, "I'm going to strip you of everything. You're just a coarse, rough woman. I need someone who brings me status, not a pack mule." Standing right next to him, his young mistress, Sophie, absent-mindedly stroked a Cartier bracelet worth $5,000, an item purchased with the exact hazard pay I bled to earn. They smirked, believing my silence was the submission of a defeated woman. They didn't know that inside the pocket of my worn-out blazer wasn't a handkerchief for wiping away tears, but a USB drive containing enough dirty financial data to send them both to prison. H hour has arrived. If you have ever been treated like an ATM by the person you share a bed with, only to be discarded when you ran dry, hit that subscribe button right now. Today, we are going to teach the ungrateful a lesson about the art of the counterattack. The air conditioning in the hallway of the Arlington Federal Courthouse was set to a temperature that felt less like climate control and more like a morgue. I stood there, my spine locked into a vertical line, heels together, hands clasped firmly behind the small of my back. Parade rest. It was a muscle memory burned into my nervous system over 20 years of service. It was the stance you took when you were waiting for orders, or when you were waiting for a storm to hit. Across the polished terrazzo floor stood Kevin. He didn't look like a man about to face a divorce hearing. He looked like he was attending a movie premiere where he was the lead actor. He was wearing that custom-tailored Armani suit I had paid the deposit for 3 Christmases ago. His hair was slicked back with enough product to withstand a hurricane, and the scent of his Tom Ford cologne was so aggressive it was practically assaulting my nostrils, overpowering the sterile, chemical smell of the courthouse floor cleaner. Hovering next to him was Sophie Lane. She was wearing a white dress that was tight enough to cut off circulation and short enough to be questionable for a federal building. But it did exactly what it was designed to do: show off the long legs that Kevin had become obsessed with. They were whispering to each other, sharing a private joke. Sophie's giggle echoed off the marble walls, a high-pitched, scratching sound like metal dragging across glass. They looked at me not with anger, but with something far worse: indifference. To them, I was just an old piece of furniture that needed to be hauled away to the dump. Kevin broke away from her and sauntered toward me. He didn't stop at a respectful distance. He invaded my personal space, using his 6'2" frame to loom over me, a tactic he used to intimidate subordinates in the corporate world. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a faux sweet register that dripped with venom. "Julia, look at you," he sneered, his eyes scanning my outfit with theatrical disgust. "What are you even wearing? Did you pick that up at Walmart on your way here? God, today is going to be such a relief. I am finally liberating myself from your utter dullness." He reached out and flicked the small unit crest pinned to my lapel, a gesture so disrespectful my hands twitched behind my back. "I'm taking the penthouse, Julia," he continued, his confidence bordering on delusion. "And I'm taking half of that military pension too. The law protects the dependent spouse, and as you know, you were always deployed. I suffered terrible loneliness. I deserve to be compensated for that emotional distress." He flashed a smile, the kind of smile used by a man who thinks he holds all the aces. "You might be good at moving boxes in a war zone, but here, in the world of the elite, you're just a pack mule, nothing more." A pack mule. The insult landed right in the center of my chest. Before I could respond, Sophie stepped up and looped her arm through Kevin's. It wasn't just a gesture of affection, it was a territorial claim. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my hands. My hands are rough. They are calloused from years of handling crates, gripping steering wheels, and dealing with heavy machinery. They are soldiers' hands. She reached up to smooth a stray hair behind her ear, a deliberate motion meant to draw my eye to her wrist. There, glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights, was a gold bracelet studded with sapphires. "Don't be too stressed, Julia," she said, her voice sugary and patronizing. "Kevin told me how resilient you are. I'm sure you'll be totally fine living in Well, some government housing somewhere. My breath hitched in my throat. I recognized that bracelet. I'd seen the exact design in a catalog Kevin had left on the coffee table. The price tag was seared into my brain. $6,500. That number wasn't just a price. It was specific. It was the exact amount of the hazard pay and hostile fire bonus I had received after the mortar attacks in Syria last year. I had transferred that money into our joint savings account to pay off his credit card debt. That wasn't just gold on her wrist. That was my blood money. That was the compensation the government gave me for nearly dying, and now it was dangling from the wrist of the woman sleeping with my husband. The blood rushed to my face, hot and violent. But I didn't break my stance. A soldier never gives the enemy the satisfaction of seeing them bleed. I inhaled sharply through my nose, forcing the rage down into the pit of my stomach, compressing it into fuel. At that precise moment, a shadow fell over us. Mr. Harold Whitman, my attorney, stepped into the circle. Harold didn't wear Armani. He wore a suit that looked like it had been bought during the Reagan administration, carrying a leather briefcase that was battered and scarred. But his black leather shoes were shined to a mirror polish that would make a drill sergeant weep with joy. Harold was a Vietnam vet, a former Marine who had seen things Kevin couldn't even imagine in his nightmares. Harold didn't even acknowledge Kevin or Sophie. He didn't look at them. He stood shoulder to shoulder with me, staring straight at the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. Sergeant Lewis, Harold's voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. Is the ammunition loaded? I finally unlocked my gaze from the bracelet and looked Kevin dead in the eye. For the first time in months, he didn't see the sad, tired wife begging for affection. He saw Sergeant First Class Lewis. My eyes were cold, empty. Roger that, sir, I replied, my voice steady as a flatline. Locked and loaded. Safety is off. Kevin frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his perfectly groomed face. He didn't understand the code. He didn't know that the ambush was already set. The bailiff opened the heavy double doors. All rise, a voice called out from inside. The battle had begun. My mind drifted back 6 months to a Thanksgiving that felt less like a holiday and more like an endurance test. The memory hit me with the distinct smell of roasted poultry and expensive perfume, a nauseating combination that still makes my stomach turn. Our penthouse in Arlington, the one with the panoramic view of the Potomac that Kevin loved to post on Instagram, was packed. On paper, the deed had both our names on it. In reality, every single mortgage payment was auto-drafted from my military salary. But looking around that evening, you would have thought Kevin was the Emperor of Virginia. The living room was filled with his entrepreneur friends, men in loafers with no socks, and women who looked like they stepped out of a catalog, sipping glasses of oaky Chardonnay and laughing about market volatility. I, on the other hand, was in hell. Or rather, the kitchen. The oven was blasting heat into the small space, turning it into a sauna. I was wrestling a 20-pound turkey out of the roasting pan, sweat trickling down my spine and soaking into my shirt. My lower back throbbed, a persistent reminder of a Humvee rollover in Iraq 3 years ago that the VA was still processing. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the pain, and glanced through the pass-through window. Kevin was holding court in the center of the room. He had a crystal wine glass in one hand, his face flushed red with excitement and alcohol. He was telling a story, gesturing wildly, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife was 10 feet away, doing the work of a catering crew for free. To him, I wasn't his partner. I was the help. Suddenly, the kitchen door swung open. It was Brenda, the wife of one of Kevin's potential investors. She looked lost, holding an empty glass of ice. "Oh, Julia," she exclaimed, her eyes widening as she saw me wiping grease off my forehead with the back of my hand. "You're working so hard back here. You know, Kevin mentioned you work for the government. Is it clerical work? Archives?" I paused, forcing a polite smile onto my face. "No, actually, I'm a sergeant first class in logistics. I manage supply chains for—" "Julia!" Kevin appeared in the doorway like he had been summoned by a silent alarm. He cut me off mid-sentence, his voice booming with forced cheerfulness, but his eyes were hard, warning me to shut up. She handles inventory paperwork, Kevin said, dismissing my entire career with a wave of his hand. He walked over and draped an arm around my shoulders, his fingers digging into my trapezius muscle hard enough to bruise. It looked like a hug. It felt like a muzzle. You know how the Army is. It's all very manual, bureaucratic. Not exactly the high-level strategic business mindset we operate on, right, guys? He laughed, and the group in the living room laughed with him, a chorus of obedient sycophants. Julia doesn't really get macroeconomics, he added, squeezing my shoulder tighter. She's just really good at roasting birds. The room erupted in laughter again. I stood there, frozen, the heavy turkey platter burning my hands through the oven mitts. I felt like I had been slapped. My 20 years of service, my rank, my expertise, reduced to roasting birds because my husband was ashamed of having a wife who wore combat boots instead of Louboutins. The night dragged on. I carried out trays of stuffing and mashed potatoes, trying to make myself invisible. As I refilled wine glasses, I heard Kevin's voice rise above the din. Yeah, this place was a little gift I bought for the wifey, he announced, gesturing grandly at the floor-to-ceiling windows. Crypto had a monster year. I'm actually thinking of trading in the sedan for a new BMW next month. Something that matches the lifestyle, you know. A gift? I nearly dropped the gravy boat. He was lying, boldly, shamelessly lying. The down payment for this condo came from my grandmother's inheritance, money she had saved her entire life from working in a textile mill. The monthly payments came from my paycheck. Kevin hadn't contributed a single dime to this property unless you counted the hideous, abstract art he insisted on buying for the hallway. He was building a monument to his own success using my sweat and my grandmother's legacy as the bricks. I looked at his friends, gazing at him with admiration, eating the food I cooked, sitting in the home I paid for, and honoring the parasite who was bleeding me dry. By the time the last guest left, the silence in the apartment was deafening. The only sound was the dishwasher humming. The kitchen was a disaster zone of dirty plates and wine stains. Kevin loosened his tie and flopped onto the Italian leather sofa, scrolling through his phone. He didn't offer to help. He never did. Kevin, I said softly, my voice raspy from exhaustion. I saw the bank statement today. The interest rates on the credit card are going up again. Maybe we could scale back on the parties for a while? He didn't even look up. He let out a groan of annoyance. Money, 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 he snapped, throwing his phone onto the cushion. God, you are such a buzzkill, Julia. Do not bring that poverty mindset into this house. Tonight was about networking. It's an investment. You have to spend money to make money. He stood up, glaring at me with genuine disdain. I'm sleeping in the guest room, he muttered, walking past me without a backward glance. You ruin everything with your penny pinching. Clean this mess up. The bedroom door slammed shut. I stood alone in the middle of the dark living room, watching my reflection in the glass window. I looked tired. I looked old. And for the first time, the truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. I didn't have a partner. I didn't have a family. I was just a host body for a very large, very well-dressed parasite. If you've ever felt alone in a room full of people because your partner made you feel small, or if you've ever had your hard work claimed by someone else, I need you to know you aren't crazy. Please take a second to like this video and comment, I see you, below. It's a small code, just for us to say that we acknowledge each other's invisible sacrifices. Let's create a space where we are finally seen. I turned away from the window and looked at the pile of dirty dishes. I wasn't going to clean them. Not tonight. Tonight, I was going to start counting the cost. Fort Belvoir, 2:46 a.m. Rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of the logistics warehouse, a rhythmic pounding that sounded uncomfortably like distant machine gun fire. I sat alone in the glow of my laptop screen, the blue light casting harsh shadows on a face that was gaunt from lack of sleep. Through my headphones, the gravelly, steady voice of Jocko Willink cut through the noise of the storm. Don't blame, don't make excuses, take ownership. That podcast was the only thing keeping me upright. I had just finished auditing a supply shipment worth $2 million for the Army. Ammunition, medical kits, MREs, every single item was accounted for, down to the last penny. My professional life was a masterpiece of precision. But when I minimized the inventory window and opened my personal banking app, precision was replaced by a hemorrhage. Red numbers, everywhere. Our joint account balance was flashing a low funds warning. My paycheck, which had been direct deposited just yesterday, was already down by 80%. 80% in 24 hours. My stomach churned. Kevin had told me he needed to move funds for a deposit on a land development project in Loudoun County. He said it was a sure thing, a quick flip. But staring at that decimated balance, the risk manager in me started screaming. There was no paper trail for a deposit, just a massive cash withdrawal and a series of vague transfers. The next day, during my lunch break, reality hit me harder than the rain. I sat in the cab of my 2015 Ford F-150, the engine idling just to keep the heat on. My back was screaming in protest. The damp weather always aggravated the old injury, so I had slapped a thermal patch on my lumbar spine just to get through the shift. Lunch was a sad affair, a sandwich made from stale bread and discount deli ham I'd brought from home, washed down with a bottle of tap water refilled for the third time. I stared at the dashboard, doing mental math. I wanted a coffee, a real coffee. A $5 latte from Starbucks would have felt like heaven right now. But I didn't dare swipe my card. What if it was declined? What if the clerk looked at me with pity? Ping. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. A notification from the bank. Transaction alert, the Capitol Grill, Washington, D.C. Amount, 450 Benitos ears. I froze, a piece of dry crust halfway to my mouth. The Capitol Grill. It was the kind of place where senators and lobbyists ate dry-aged steaks and drank wines older than me. Kevin was eating lunch there right now. $450. For lunch. That was my entire grocery budget for the month. That was 2 weeks of gas for my truck. I looked down at the pathetic sandwich in my hand, feeling the bile rise in my throat. I was literally eating garbage in a parking lot so my husband could feast on Wagyu beef and play big shot with money he didn't earn. Something was wrong. Fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. I reached for my phone and rewound the Jocko podcast a few seconds. The most dangerous enemy isn't the one standing in front of you with a gun. It's the one standing behind you with a smile. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. I had trusted Kevin because that's what wives do. I let him handle the investments because he said he was the expert, the businessman with the vision. But looking at that $450 notification, I realized I wasn't a partner. I was a hostage, a financial hostage. I wiped my mouth and tossed the sandwich wrapper into the footwell. The exhaustion that had been weighing me down suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The soldier was waking up. I needed evidence. I needed to audit my own life. I didn't go home after my shift. Kevin would be there, probably exhausted from his meetings, expecting dinner. Instead, I drove to the public library 3 towns over, a place Kevin wouldn't be caught dead in. I found a secluded corner and opened my personal laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I navigated to the login page for the secondary credit cards, the ones Kevin insisted were emergency only, and kept in his name, though I was the primary account holder. I typed in the password we had always used. Our anniversary 105. Access denied. My heart skipped a beat. He had changed it. He'd locked me out of my own credit line without telling me. I clicked Forgot Password. The security question popped up. What was the name of your first pet? I stared at the screen. Kevin didn't have a first pet, but he had a first love, a high school girlfriend he talked about way too much when we first started dating. Her dog's name was Buster. It was a long shot, a guess born of suspicion and cynicism. I typed it in, Buster, access granted. The dashboard loaded and the list of transactions unspooled down the screen like a receipt from hell. There was no land deal. There was no real estate investment. Instead, I saw a litany of betrayal. Victoria's Secret, Tiffany & Co., BetMGM Online Casino, the Ritz-Carlton, Tyson's Corner, Tuesday, 1 p.m. Tuesday at 1 p.m. He was supposed to be at a strategy meeting. I scrolled further. Thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, wasted on lingerie that wasn't for me, jewelry I never received, and gambling losses that made my head spin. My hand shook as I reached for my phone to take a picture of the screen. I wasn't shaking from fear. I was shaking from a rage so pure it felt like burning magnesium. The enemy had finally revealed himself, and he was sleeping in my bed. I did not drive to K Street in downtown Washington, D.C., where the glass-walled law firms charge $500 an hour just to watch you cry while they check their Rolexes. I didn't need a lawyer who saw me as a billable hour. I needed someone who understood the code. Instead, I drove my truck to the outskirts of Arlington, pulling into the gravel lot of VFW Post 150. The Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall didn't look like a place of salvation. It was a low-slung brick building with a faded sign and a parking lot full of domestic pickups and motorcycles. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke, old wood polish, and cheap beer. A scent that would send most of Kevin's friends running for the hills. But to me, it smelled like safety. It smelled like truth. Harold Whitman was sitting at the far end of the bar, polishing his bifocals with a cocktail napkin. Harold was a former Marine infantry officer who had done 2 tours in Vietnam before putting himself through law school on the GI Bill. Now, he specialized in defending service members who were being screwed over by the system, or their spouses. He looked up as I walked in. My eyes were puffy from crying in the truck, but I held my posture rigid, trying to project strength I didn't feel. Harold didn't offer a platitude. He didn't ask, "How are you?" because he could see the answer written on my face. He simply slid a coaster across the bar, placed a cold bottle of beer on it, and spoke in that gravel mixer voice of his. "Sit down, Sergeant," he grunted. "You look like you just walked through a minefield without a metal detector." I sat on the cracked vinyl stool and placed the stack of papers I had printed from the library onto the sticky bar top. My hands were shaking so bad the papers rattled against the wood. "He says I'm paranoid, Harold," I whispered, my voice threatening to crack. "He says I don't know how to manage money. He says I'm crazy." Harold put his glasses on and pulled the stack toward him. He didn't look at the numbers like an accountant. He looked at them like a recon scout analyzing a terrain map for enemy positions. His thick gray eyebrows furrowed as he flipped page after page. "Victoria's Secret," he read aloud, his tone flat. "Day spa packages, first-class tickets to Vegas on a Tuesday." He stopped and looked up at me over the rim of his glasses. The compassion in his eyes was there, but it was overshadowed by a cold, hard fury. "Julia," he said firmly, "this isn't poor management. This isn't you being crazy. This is a systematic extraction of assets. He isn't just spending your money, he's bleeding you dry." Hearing someone else say it, hearing a man of honor call it what it was, broke something inside me. The dam finally burst. I put my head in my hands and let out a sob that I had been holding back for 6 months. It wasn't a cry of weakness. It was the terrifying relief of validation. I wiped my face quickly, embarrassed by the outburst. Instinctively, I pulled my hands off the table and tucked them into my lap. I hated my hands. They were rough, dry, and scarred from years of loading pallets and fixing engines. Kevin had always made a point of staring at them with disgust, telling me they didn't deserve to wear the diamond ring he had bought on credit. Harold noticed the movement. He reached across the bar and gently grabbed my wrist, pulling my hand back onto the table. He turned my palm up, tracing a calloused ridge on my thumb with his own scarred finger. "What are you hiding these for?" he asked, his voice stern, like a commanding officer correcting a trooper. "Are you ashamed of labor? Are you ashamed of serving your country?" I shook my head, unable to speak. "These hands loaded ammunition to keep boys alive overseas," Harold said, looking me dead in the eye. "These hands paid the mortgage. These hands are more beautiful than any manicured set of claws you see on those women in D.C. Don't you ever let a bastard who has never held a rifle tell you what your value is." The words hit me like a jolt of electricity, traveling straight down my spine. The shame that Kevin had carefully cultivated in me for years began to crack. Harold wasn't just my lawyer. He was the father figure I desperately needed, reminding me of who I was before I became Kevin's ATM. Harold reached into his battered briefcase and pulled out a small black notebook. He slid it across the bar to me. "Listen to me, Sergeant," he said, shifting into tactical mode. "Do not go home and scream. Do not throw his clothes on the lawn. Do not confront him, not yet. The enemy is strongest when he knows you are angry because he knows he can manipulate that anger." He tapped the notebook. "You are going to use a tactic called gray rock. You are going to become as boring, as unreactive, and as dull as a gray rock on the side of the road. If he baits you, you say nothing. If he insults you, you nod. You let him think you are a stupid, submissive sheep. You let him get overconfident." Harold leaned in, his eyes hard as flint. "You document everything in this book. Every time he leaves the house, every lie he tells, every dime he spends. You gather your intel. And you stay silent. We wait until he is completely exposed, and then—" Harold paused, a grim smile touching his lips. "Then we drop the bomb." I picked up the black notebook. It felt heavy in my hand, like a weapon. I nodded, tucking it into the inside pocket of my jacket, right over my heart. "Roger that, sir," I said. "Operation Balance has begun." I walked out of the VFW and into the gray Virginia afternoon. The sky was overcast, but for the first time in a long time, the fog in my head was gone. I had a mission, and I wasn't fighting alone anymore. When I unlocked the front door of the penthouse, Kevin was waiting for me. He was standing in the foyer holding a massive bouquet of long-stemmed red roses, wearing a smile that was bright enough to blind oncoming traffic. It was the same smile that had charmed me 10 years ago, back when I thought he was a misunderstood genius. Now, looking at him under the cold LED lights of our hallway, it just looked like the smile of a used car salesman trying to offload a lemon with a cracked transmission. "I'm sorry about the other night," he said, his voice dropping into that smooth, practiced register he used for clients. "I've been so stressed with the market. I just want to secure our future, you know? I shouldn't have snapped at you." He thrust the bouquet toward me. In psychology textbooks, this is called love bombing. It's a classic manipulation tactic. The narcissist senses their victim is pulling away, so they flood them with affection and gifts to reel them back in, to reset the cycle of abuse. He could feel the distance I had put between us, and he was yanking on the leash. I took the flowers. My face remained completely neutral. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I became exactly what Harold had told me to be, a gray rock. "Thanks," I said, my voice flat and uninteresting. "They're nice." I turned my back on him before he could lean in for a hug, walking straight to the kitchen to find a vase. I could feel his eyes boring into my back, confused by the lack of emotional payoff. He wanted gratitude, or he wanted an argument. He didn't know what to do with indifference, but Kevin wasn't one to give up easily. He followed me into the kitchen, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small, elegantly wrapped black box. "I got this for you, too," he said, sliding it across the granite counter. A new perfume. Something a little more sophisticated than that machine oil smell you always seem to carry around. I untied the ribbon and opened the box. Chanel No. 5. It was expensive, it was classic, and it was exactly the kind of gift you give someone when you don't know them at all. Or worse, when you don't care. I am allergic to the aldehydes in Chanel No. 5. It gives me a migraine within 10 minutes and makes my throat close up. Kevin knew this. We had left a dinner party 3 years ago because the hostess was wearing too much of it. He hadn't bought this for me. He bought it because he liked the smell. Or maybe Sophie liked the smell. Or maybe it was just a gift with purchase he got for free when he bought something for her, and he figured he could toss the scraps to his wife to keep her quiet. Disgust rose in my throat like bile. I wanted to throw the bottle at the wall. Instead, I carefully closed the lid and placed it on the counter. "I'll save it for a special occasion," I lied. Kevin nodded, looking satisfied. He believed he had successfully purchased my silence with a bottle of poison. Dinner was a quiet affair. I had refused to cook, citing a late shift, so we were eating delivery pizza straight from the box. Kevin hated eating pizza without a plate, but I didn't get up to fetch one. Midway through his third slice of pepperoni, he wiped his mouth and looked at me with faux concern. Here it came. The gaslighting. "You know, Julia," he started, tilting his head. You've been acting really strange lately. You're so withdrawn, sullen. Are you sure you aren't depressed? I know deployment can mess with your head. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. I have a buddy who knows a great therapist, he continued. Maybe you should go talk to someone. You seem unstable. My hand tightened around my water glass. He was trying to plant the seed. He wanted to label me as mentally unstable or depressed, so that if I ever tried to expose him, no one would believe me. Oh, poor Julia. She's just having a breakdown. She's imagining things. I chewed my pizza slowly, forcing myself to swallow. I looked at him, but I didn't really see him. I looked through him, staring at the wall behind his head. I'm fine, Kevin, I said, my voice monotonous. Just busy at work. End of fiscal year inventory. Kevin frowned. His brow furrowed in annoyance. He wasn't getting the reaction he craved. He wanted me to cry, to deny it, to fight back so he could call me hysterical. My silence was starving him. It was driving him insane. That night, the bedroom was suffocating. I lay on my side of the bed, facing the window, my back to him. Kevin fell asleep almost instantly, snoring loudly and rhythmically, like a toddler without a care in the world. How could he sleep? How could he lie there, comfortable in the bed I bought, in the house I paid for, after spending the day lying to my face? I stared into the darkness, my eyes wide open. On the nightstand, Kevin's phone buzzed. Once. The screen lit up the room with a harsh white glow for a split second before going dark again. It was 2:00 in the morning. I didn't need to be a detective to know who was texting him at this hour. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to grab the phone, to wake him up, to scream at him until he confessed. But I didn't move. Harold's voice echoed in my head. Wait until he is exposed. Don't let him manipulate your anger. I couldn't act on a hunch. A late-night text could be explained away as a wrong number or spam. I needed physical evidence. I needed something tangible, something he couldn't gaslight his way out of in a courtroom. I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Kevin's breathing deepened into the heavy, slack-jawed snore of deep REM sleep. Slowly, carefully, I slid out from under the duvet. My bare feet touched the cold hardwood floor. I didn't make a sound. I moved with the silent precision of a soldier on patrol in enemy territory. I crept out of the bedroom and headed toward the laundry room. It was time to see what secrets he was carrying in his pockets. 3:00 in the morning. The basement laundry room was silent except for the low hum of the dehumidifier. I stood over the pile of dirty clothes, sorting whites from darks. It was a mundane task, but 20 years in the Army had drilled a specific habit into me: always check your gear. Before you wash a uniform, you check the pockets for live rounds, lighters, or sensitive intel. Before you wash a suit, you check for receipts. I picked up the navy blue blazer Kevin had worn to his late meetings yesterday. He always threw his clothes in a heap, confident that the laundry fairy, me, would take care of it. My hand slid into the inner breast pocket. I felt something stiff. I pulled it out. A piece of thick thermal paper folded into quarters. As I unfolded it, a scent wafted up to my nose. It wasn't the metallic smell of ink, and it certainly wasn't the Chanel No. 5 he had gifted me earlier. It was vanilla. Sickly sweet, cloying vanilla. The kind of cheap body spray teenagers wear. My heart began to beat faster, a heavy thud-thud-thud against my ribcage like a war drum. I smoothed the receipt out under the harsh white glare of the fluorescent tube light overhead. Cartier, Tyson's Corner Galleria. Date, yesterday. Time, 2:30 p.m. Item, love bracelet, 18K gold. Total, $6,500. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My ears started ringing. $6,500. That number wasn't random. It was precise. It was the exact sum of the hazard pay and hostile fire bonus I had received last month after my deployment to Iraq. That money was blood money. I had earned it while mortar shells were raining down on our compound. I had transferred that entire check into our joint savings account because Kevin had begged me. saying we needed to pay down his business credit card debt. He didn't pay the debt. He bought a bracelet. He took the money I'd risked my life for, money earned in sweat, fear, and sand, and used it to buy jewelry for another woman. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. Instead, a cold, deadly calm washed over me. I ran upstairs to my home office and flipped open my laptop. It was time for OSINT, Open Source Intelligence. I navigated to Instagram and typed in the name I had suspected for months, Sophie Lane, Kevin's 26-year-old executive assistant. Her profile was public. Of course it was. Narcissists love an audience. The most recent post was from 5 hours ago. It was a photo of a woman's hand holding a flute of champagne against a blurred background of a dimly lit bar. But the focus wasn't on the drink. It was on her wrist. There it was. The Cartier Love bracelet, gleaming gold under the ambient light. I read the caption, and my stomach dropped. Being loved is the greatest feeling in the world. Thank you, Daddy K, for the amazing 3-month anniversary gift. Blessed, you're sad, Cartier Love. Spoiled. 3 months. I did the math instantly. 3 months ago, I was in physical therapy at Walter Reed Hospital, learning how to walk without a cane after my back injury flared up. While I was struggling to take a single step without pain, my husband was starting an affair with his assistant. I stared at the screen. The tears that had threatened to fall earlier were gone. They had evaporated in the heat of my rage. The pain was still there, massive and crushing. But it had transformed into something else, fuel. Cold, high-octane rocket fuel. I clicked print. The photo of Sophie's wrist slid out of the printer tray. I took the original receipt and the printed photo. I laid them side by side on my desk and took a high-resolution photo with my phone. Then, I uploaded the files to a secure cloud drive that Kevin didn't know existed. Backup 1, Backup 2. Backup 3. I went back down to the laundry room. I folded the copy of the receipt, not the original, and tucked it back into Kevin's jacket pocket. I wasn't going to wake him up. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. I put his suit into the dry cleaning pile. I would have it pressed and pristine for him tomorrow. He would wear the jacket of his betrayal to work, completely unaware that I had the evidence to destroy him. I looked at the washing machine, watching the water swirl around my own clothes. The marriage was dead. It died at 2:30 p.m. yesterday at a jewelry counter in Tyson's Corner. Now, it was just a matter of disposing of the body and collecting the war reparations. If you have ever discovered a betrayal that made your blood run cold, you know exactly how I felt in that laundry room. It's a pain that changes you forever. Please hit that like button and comment "I stand with you" below. Let's show the world that we are not victims. We are survivors preparing to fight back. I turned off the basement light. I wasn't Julia the wife anymore. I was Sergeant Lewis, and I was going to war. Sunday morning. The church parking lot was filling up with sedans and SUVs, families in their Sunday best heading inside for the service. I sat in my truck, the engine off, gripping the small, leather-bound Bible my grandmother had given me when I enlisted. I didn't go inside. I wasn't looking for a sermon on forgiveness today. I was looking for orders. I opened the worn pages to Psalm 144, verse 1. My finger traced the familiar lines. Praise be to the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle into my bones. God didn't teach me to be a doormat. He didn't teach me to submit to injustice. He taught me to fight. He gave me the strength to survive the desert, and he would give me the strength to survive this divorce. I kissed the page and tucked the Bible into the glove compartment. A surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded my system. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the commander of my own liberation. I pulled out my phone and dialed Harold Whitman. He answered on the second ring. Whitman, he grunted. It's Lewis, I said, my voice steady. Activate Operation Balance. I have the evidence. Now I'm going for the kill. Over the next few weeks, I transformed our garage into my personal TOC, Tactical Operations Center. While Kevin was working late, which I now knew meant drinking champagne with Sophie. I went to work on the family computer. It was a shared desktop in the study, and Kevin, in his arrogance, had never bothered to log out of his iCloud account. He assumed I was too technologically illiterate to snoop. Big mistake. I installed a legal keylogger software that tracked every keystroke. Every email, every text message, every incognito browser search was captured and sent directly to a secure server I accessed only from my phone. The data poured in like a flood. It wasn't just the affair. That was just the tip of the iceberg. I discovered a gambling addiction that made my blood run cold. Kevin was betting heavily on an offshore sports betting site hosted in Costa Rica. In the last month alone, he had lost $20,000. But the real bomb dropped on a Tuesday night. I saw an email draft to a mortgage lender. Kevin was trying to take out a second mortgage on the penthouse, the one I paid for, to cover his gambling debts. And right there, attached to the application, was a digital signature. My signature. He had forged it. He was about to leverage my home to pay for his vice. I needed to cut the supply line. In logistics, if you want to starve the enemy, you stop the trucks. I drove to the finance office at Fort Belvoir the next morning. I filled out a direct deposit change form, rerouting 100% of my salary and housing allowance to a brand new account at Navy Federal Credit Union. An account Kevin didn't even know existed. I left just enough in the old joint account to cover the water and electric bills so the lights wouldn't go out immediately. 2 days later, Kevin texted me while I was on duty. "Hey babe, just check the account. Payday was yesterday, right? It's not showing up." I smiled at my phone. I typed back, lying with the ease of a seasoned operator. "Yeah, big issue with DFI's system-wide. They're doing a server migration. Whole unit is delayed. Might be a week or two." DFI's, Defense Finance and Accounting Service, is notoriously slow, but they weren't doing a migration. Kevin didn't know that. He had never taken 5 minutes to learn how military pay worked. "Ugh. Typical government incompetence," he replied. "Let me know when it drops." He bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. He was about to starve to death financially, and he didn't even know the famine had started. Fast forward to the night before the court hearing. We are back to the present timeline, just hours before the confrontation in the hallway. The penthouse was quiet. Kevin was in the bedroom, packing a small bag for what he called a business trip, but what I knew was a celebratory weekend with Sophie. He was humming to himself, picking out ties, radiating the confidence of a man who thinks he has already won. He thought tomorrow he would walk into court, paint me as the neglectful, absent soldier wife, and walk out with half my pension and the keys to the condo. I sat in the living room, holding a small silver USB drive in my hand. It felt light, insignificant, but inside it held the weight of a nuclear warhead. The photos of Sophie wearing the Cartier bracelet, the credit card statements showing the jewelry purchase, the logs from the Costa Rican gambling site, the forged mortgage application, and the kicker. A spreadsheet of consulting fees he had received in cash from a shady contractor, money he had never reported to the IRS. I looked at the closed bedroom door one last time. I could hear him whistling. "Sleep well, Kevin," I whispered to the empty room, "because tomorrow you're going to wake up in a nightmare." I slipped the USB drive into my pocket and turned off the lights. The ambush was set. All I had to do now was wait for him to walk into the kill zone. The attack began at 9 o'clock sharp. Kevin's lawyer was a slick, polished man named Rutherford, the kind of attorney who charged $600 an hour and wore cufflinks that cost more than my first car. He stood up, buttoned his Italian jacket, and launched a full-scale assault on my character. He didn't paint Kevin as a cheater. He painted him as a martyr. According to Rutherford, Kevin was a devoted husband who had sacrificed his own career potential to support a wife who was married to the military. Then he went for the jugular. "Your Honor," Rutherford said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "My client has lived in fear for years. Sergeant Lewis brought the war home with her. She is cold, distant, and prone to aggressive outbursts. Her PTSD makes her a danger to the emotional stability of this household. Kevin sought companionship elsewhere, only because he was terrified of the stranger sleeping in his bed. I sat there, my hands clenched into fists beneath the mahogany table, my knuckles turning white. Kevin was sitting next to him, head bowed, dabbing at dry eyes with a pristine white handkerchief. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. In the gallery behind him, Sophie Lane was slouched in her seat. She wasn't even watching the proceedings. She was holding her phone low, recording a stealth video for TikTok, probably captioning it with something about winning and securing the bag. She thought this was over. She thought they had already won. I took a deep breath. Let them expend their ammo, I thought. Let them run dry. When Rutherford finally sat down, looking smug, Harold Whitman stood up. He didn't have a team of paralegals. He didn't have flash. He just picked up his battered laptop and walked to the podium. "Your Honor," Harold rumbled, his voice filling the room, "we don't have tears today. And we don't have stories. We have math." He plugged an HDMI cable into his laptop. The massive screen on the wall flickered to life. "Exhibit A," Harold announced. A complex, color-coded spreadsheet appeared. It was a forensic accounting of our joint finances over the last 5 years. "This is a cash flow analysis," Harold explained, using a laser pointer to trace a thick green line. "This green line is Sergeant Lewis's military salary and her inheritance from her grandmother. It flows into the joint account." He moved the pointer to a spiderweb of red lines shooting out of the account. "And these red lines," Harold continued, his voice hardening, "are unauthorized withdrawals. These are not household expenses. These are transfers to hidden accounts, crypto wallets, and luxury merchants. This is not a marriage, Your Honor. This is an embezzlement scheme." Kevin's head snapped up. The sorrowful act vanished instantly, replaced by genuine shock. He stared at the screen, watching his secret financial life displayed in high definition. He had deleted his browser history, but he forgot that bank servers never forget. "Let's look at the specifics," Harold said. He clicked the remote. The screen changed. On the left side was a scanned copy of the receipt I had pulled from his pocket. On the right side was the screenshot of Sophie's Instagram post. Cartier, $6,500. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Even the court reporter paused for a second. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, narrowed her eyes and looked directly at Sophie in the gallery. Sophie froze. She saw her own wrist on the giant screen. Instinctively, she pulled the sleeve of her cardigan down, covering the gold bracelet, but the damage was done. "This purchase was made 3 days after Sergeant Lewis deposited her hazard paycheck," Harold said, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze water. "That money was paid to my client for surviving mortar fire in Syria. It is blood money. And Mr. Bennett used it to buy jewelry for his mistress while his wife was in physical therapy for a combat injury." "Objection!" Kevin shouted, jumping out of his chair. "That's a lie! That account was for investment." Crack! The judge's gavel came down like a gunshot. "Sit down, Mr. Bennett," she barked. "One more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt." Kevin collapsed back into his chair. His face was crumbling. The confident, arrogant narcissist was gone. He looked around the room, desperate for an ally, but all he saw were eyes filled with disgust. "We aren't done," Harold said. "Exhibit C." The screen changed one last time. This was the kill shot. It was a log of transactions from the Costa Rican gambling website, paired with a series of cash deposits into Kevin's personal account that did not match his employment records. "Your Honor," Harold said, turning to face the judge. "Mr. Bennett has lost over $20,000 in online sports betting in the last month alone. Furthermore, these cash deposits suggest he has been receiving kickbacks from contractors that have not been reported to the IRS." The air left the room. Tax evasion. It's one thing to cheat on your wife. It's another thing entirely to cheat the United States government. Kevin's face went from red to the color of old paper. Beside him, his expensive lawyer dropped his head into his hands, rubbing his temples. He knew it was over. He wasn't just losing a divorce case. His client was potentially facing federal prison time. I looked at Kevin. For a split second, our eyes met across the aisle. He looked terrified. He looked small. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. This is what happens, I thought, when you declare war on logistics. I didn't just want my money back, I wanted the truth. And looking at the ruins of his reputation splattered across that projection screen, I knew I had finally gotten it. The judge delivered her verdict with the precision of a surgical airstrike. She didn't waste time with lectures. She simply looked at the financial carnage projected on the screen and issued her orders. 1. The penthouse in Arlington was awarded 100% to me. Kevin had 48 hours to vacate the premises. 2. Kevin was ordered to reimburse the marital estate $50,000 for dissipation of assets, legal speak for spending our money on his mistress and his gambling addiction. 3. Kevin would assume sole liability for his personal credit card debt and the lease on the BMW he loved so much. I walked out of the courtroom feeling lighter than I had in a decade. It felt like I had just taken off a 50-pound rucksack after a 20-mile march. The air in the hallway, which had felt like a morgue just an hour ago, now felt crisp and clean. Kevin stumbled out behind me. He wasn't walking with that swagger anymore. He looked like a man who had just survived a car crash but hadn't realized he was bleeding internally. He was pale, his tie was crooked, and his eyes were wide with shock. Down the hall, Sophie Lane was waiting near the elevators. She was tapping furiously on her phone, scrolling through Uber options. She didn't rush over to hug him. She didn't look worried. She looked annoyed. Kevin saw her and quickened his pace, desperation etched on his face. "Sophie," he called out, his voice cracking. "Sophie, wait. Let me explain. It's just a temporary setback. The judge is biased because she's a woman, but I can appeal." He reached out to grab her arm. Sophie whipped around and slapped his hand away like it was a contagious disease. Her eyes were sharp, cold, and calculating. "Are you kidding me right now?" she hissed, loud enough for the bailiffs to hear. "You're broke, Kevin. You have nothing. And now you have the IRS breathing down your neck? Do not think for a second you are dragging me down into that mud with you." She looked at him with pure disdain. The Daddy K fantasy had evaporated the moment the money ran out. "And this?" she said, unclasping the gold Cartier bracelet from her wrist. "Take it back. It's tacky. Just like you." She threw the bracelet at him. It bounced off his chest and clattered onto the terrazzo floor. Kevin didn't even try to catch it. He just stood there, staring at the woman he had destroyed his marriage for, realizing she never loved him. She loved the lifestyle he stole from me. Sophie turned on her heel, her stilettos clicking sharply as she marched into an open elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing her off from his life forever. Kevin stood alone in the hallway, a pathetic figure in an expensive suit that no longer fit the man inside it. Then, his phone rang. The shrill ringtone echoed in the silence. Kevin pulled it out of his pocket, his hand shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He looked at the screen and went even paler. I knew who it was. I stood 10 feet away, watching the final domino fall. Earlier that morning, before I left for court, I had anonymously emailed a packet of documents to the compliance department and the HR director at Kevin's investment firm. It contained the logs of his gambling addiction and the evidence of his unreported cash kickbacks. In the finance world, a man with massive gambling debt is a security risk, a liability. "Hello?" Kevin answered, his voice trembling. I couldn't hear the other side, but I didn't need to. I watched Kevin's face crumble. "Fired," he squeaked. "Effective immediately." But I've given you 10 years. No, please, let me explain." He lowered the phone slowly, staring at the black screen. The call had ended. Corporate brutality is swift. In the span of 60 minutes, Kevin had lost his wife, his home, his mistress, his reputation, and his six-figure job. This was a total narcissistic collapse. The facade he had built his entire identity around had been vaporized. He looked up and saw me watching him. For a moment, he looked like a lost child. Then, the rage returned. The last defense mechanism of a weak man. He lunged toward me, eyes red and wild. "Are you happy now, Julia?" he screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "You ruined my life. You destroyed everything. You are evil. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I stood my ground, calm and immovable. I didn't ruin you, Kevin, I said, my voice steady and low. I just turned the lights on. And you just couldn't handle the glare. I took a step closer, leaning in so only he could hear me. I used the same tone he had used with me that morning, condescending, authoritative, final. Next time, I whispered, before you declare war on a logistics sergeant, make sure you check who controls your supply lines. Goodbye, Kevin. I turned my back on him. Behind me, I heard him shouting, screaming impotent curses at the ceiling. But his voice was fading. I walked toward the exit, pushing through the heavy glass doors and stepping out into the sunlight. The war was over. And I was the last one standing. 2 days after the judge's gavel fell, I stood in the center of the Arlington penthouse. It was completely empty. Kevin had moved out, but in true Kevin fashion, he hadn't done it gracefully. He had taken his clothes and his electronics, but he had left behind a chaotic mess of trash. Wire hangers scattered on the floor, empty shoeboxes, and a pile of old magazines he couldn't be bothered to carry. The air in the apartment still held a faint, lingering trace of his Tom Ford cologne. It was a ghost scent, clinging to the drywall and the curtains, a stubborn reminder of the man who had tried to erase me. But I had a solution for that. I had hired a team of industrial cleaners. They were currently in the hallway, armed with steam cleaners and heavy-duty disinfectants. I wanted this place scrubbed. I wanted every skin cell, every stray hair, and every molecule of his existence eradicated from my territory. I walked over to the sliding glass doors and threw them open. The November wind from the Potomac River rushed in. It was cold, biting, and sharp, smelling of wet leaves and river water. I closed my eyes and let it hit my face. It felt like a baptism. It swept through the living room, chasing away the stale air of a dead marriage. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until they ached. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel the crushing weight of anxiety on my chest. I looked around the empty space. I didn't feel lonely. I felt spacious. I felt like I finally had room to breathe. A knock at the open door interrupted my thoughts. "Delivery for Sergeant Lewis," a gruff voice called out. I turned to see Harold Whitman standing there. He wasn't wearing his court suit. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, holding a greasy cardboard box in one hand and a six-pack of cheap domestic beer in the other. "I figured you wouldn't have any plates," Harold said, grinning. We didn't sit at the dining table. I had already sold it. Instead, we sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor of the living room, the pizza box open between us. It was a large pepperoni pizza, glistening with oil and smelling like heaven. Harold cracked open a cold beer and handed it to me. "To freedom, Sergeant," he said, raising his can. "To freedom," I replied, clinking my can against his. I took a bite of the pizza. The hot cheese burned the roof of my mouth, the spicy pepperoni hitting my tongue with a burst of salt and fat. It was delicious. It tasted better than any dry, $20 appetizer I had ever forced down at one of Kevin's pretentious cocktail parties. It tasted better than the lobster we ate at the company dinners where I was ignored. This meal was honest. There was no pretense here, just two soldiers sharing rations after a successful mission. "So," Harold said, wiping tomato sauce from his lip, "what now? You keeping the castle?" I looked around the expansive, echoing room. The view was $1 million, but the energy was all wrong. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm selling it. The market is high. I can get a good price." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded map I had printed out. I smoothed it out on the floor next to the pizza. "I've been looking at properties down by Lake Anna," I said, pointing to a spot on the map. "There's a small cabin. It's got 2 acres of land, a dock, and absolutely no marble countertops. It's quiet. It smells like pine trees, not exhaust fumes." Harold nodded approvingly. "Sounds like a good perimeter." "And," I added, a genuine smile spreading across my face, "I'm going to get a dog. A golden retriever. I'm going to name him Scout. Just me, the dog, and the water." "You don't need a man in that picture?" Harold asked, his eyes twinkling. "No," I said firmly. "I don't need anyone to define my happiness anymore. I have my career. I have my own money, money that is safe in a credit union nobody knows about. And I have my freedom. I spent 10 years serving a man who saw me as an appliance. I'm going to spend the rest of my life serving myself. Harold raised his beer again. To scout, he said. To scout, I agreed. Before I left the apartment for the final time, I went into the master bathroom. The cleaners had polished the mirror until it was streak-free. I looked at the woman staring back at me. She looked different than she did 6 months ago. There were fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her skin looked a little weathered. She wasn't 25 anymore. I looked down at my hands resting on the granite counter. They were still rough. They were still calloused. There was a small scar on my knuckle from where I had scraped it loading a crate last week. But my back was straight, my chin was up, and my eyes were clear. They were the eyes of a woman who had walked through fire and come out made of steel. I reached up and touched the small military crest I had pinned to my jacket, the same one Kevin had flicked with such disdain in the courthouse hallway. I had won the hardest battle of my life. I hadn't fought for territory or oil. I had fought for my own value. If you are listening to this story right now and you feel stuck, if you feel like you are being used, ignored, or underestimated by the people who are supposed to love you, please remember this. You are stronger than you think. You have reserves of courage you haven't even tapped into yet. Do not wait for a knight in shining armor to come and save you. Knights don't exist, but commanders do. Gather your intel. Make your plan. Secure your resources and save yourself. You are the commander of your own life. Do not ever hand the steering wheel to anyone else. I took one last look at the empty penthouse, turned off the lights, and closed the door on the past. I am Julia Lewis. Mission complete. Looking back, the most valuable lesson I learned wasn't about revenge. It was about the logistics of self-respect. In the Army, we are taught that you cannot secure a perimeter if you don't know what you are protecting. For years, I left the gates to my life wide open because I thought love meant total surrender. I was wrong. True love, whether from a partner or for yourself, never requires you to bankrupt your dignity or your bank account. Your skills, your intuition, and your scars are not liabilities. They are your armor. Never let anyone convince you that your strength is a flaw. Now, I'm turning the briefing over to you. Have you ever ignored a red flag because you wanted to believe the best in someone? Or have you ever had to audit your own life to find the truth? Drop a comment below with your story. I read every single one, and your experience might be the survival guide someone else needs right now. If Julia's journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Join our squad. Here, we don't just tell stories. We share the blueprints for taking our power back. Stay strong and stay vigilant.